The information contained in this video is intended to provide educational information and does not make claims or provide medical advice as it relates to any products sold by Enviroimmune or on this site. This video is for educational purposes only. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent diseases.
To a product called Restore, which has been developed specifically for patients with long-haul COVID. I'm going to go back into my last 2.5-year journey, which has really been something I didn't anticipate in this part of my medical career, to effectively be engulfed in a new disease entity, very different to what I've done for 40 years, which is to treat rheumatological disorders, autoimmune disorders. But obviously, as everybody knows, we had the onset of a pandemic with the coronavirus, which was something that turned the whole world upside down. And unbeknownst to me, I was working in my rheumatology practice, which was affected in the same way as many other businesses, both personally with staff as well as with patients. And we basically were initially focused on the acute COVID event, where obviously we weren't prepared for it. We saw people having this very, very severe inflammatory reaction to COVID, resulting in hospitalizations and unfortunately in many deaths. And to a certain extent, I was outside that arena because as a rheumatologist, I was really working in my practice and just aware of what was happening, but not really being part of the day-to-day, simply following the literature. So as this epidemic went on and we started developing various forms of therapies to try and combat the so-called cytokine storm, which was very obviously the reaction of the body to being infected by COVID, it became very apparent that this was almost like a hyped up, overactive autoimmune disorder where the body's own immune system was fighting off the effects of being invaded by the coronavirus. But unfortunately, the response was so exuberant that at the end of the day, the consequences of this overreaction was something that resulted in severe adverse events, clinical symptoms, and ultimately, in many cases, death. The similarity, however, between this cytokine storm and what I've been treating led me into looking at what was going on with a lot of patients who survived their acute infection, but for months, and now we can almost say for years thereafter, we've seen that almost 1 in 4 or 5 patients, as the NIH reports, are affected in a long-term fashion by their acute COVID infection. So with that background in mind, I started seeing a tremendous number of these patients and doing as whatever good rheumatologists would do, we were trying to target the abnormal so-called cytokine or instigator inflammatory-wise of the cause of the symptoms. And you were seeing this multiplicity of abnormal cytokines still being present in people who had gone through the acute crisis, but were continuing to have symptoms. At that point in time, I was involved in doing research with monoclonal antibodies for so-called long-haul COVID patients, but I was seeing long-haul COVID patients outside of the study in a higher and higher number. And it became apparent to me that one of the basic causes of their symptoms was a dysfunction of their autonomic nervous systems. Somewhere down the road, COVID had affected their ability to balance the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And as a result of that, a tremendous number of the symptoms, including fatigue, brain fog, gastrointestinal, neurological, cardiac, were symptoms that were occurring because of autonomic dysfunction, which we actually had we were very fortunate. We were doing a study on the autonomic nervous system measurement at that time in our research center, and we were able to measure a very high number of patients who had an imbalance between their so-called parasympathetic and sympathetic responses. That gave us very, very significant insight into the symptoms the patients were experiencing, and they were very similar to a condition that is well diagnosed and recognized, such as something called POTS, or dysautonomia, where there is this dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system. So with the background of now recognizing, almost being able to pinpoint patients coming into my office who, after I heard their symptoms, I knew they had autonomic dysfunction, and then we tested it and were able to prove it. We really were faced with, well, okay, so now we've got the idea how to recognize what's happening, but what do we do about treating it? And the truth is that the treatments for dysautonomia, or POTS, which has been around and recognized for many years, are to this day still a combination of therapies which are somewhat difficult to be sure they're going to work. People struggle with the treatments. There certainly is a need in that particular situation for additional therapies, non-medical wise, in terms of trying to help people with their hydration, with making sure they don't pool their blood. But regardless, it was something very similar to what we were seeing in the COVID long haul population. So I was there doing my best to treat patients with the standard medicines that I have available. And I was approached by researchers who I'd worked with in the past from the University of Tel Aviv, who had seen some of the work that I'd done, and ultimately had asked whether they would be able to show me some of their studies that they thought may be of value. And I said, sure. And it was quite a mind-boggling experience for me to suddenly go from where I had been traditionally using hardcore pharmaceuticals, if you want to call them that, but certainly traditional medications, to suddenly look at a formulation that was really natural and nutraceutical in nature. And in particular, Professor Yankel Gabet, who is at Tel Aviv University, and he's head of the Department of Anatomy and Anthropology, and has a huge experience in treating inflammation with nutraceutical products, including CBD and many other natural products, demonstrated how in their laboratory with animals, mice in particular, they had been able to use a combination of nutraceuticals, in particular 3, which are called, one is called beta-caryophyllene, the other one is DHEA, and the other one is pregnenolone. And they had shown how these 3 nutraceuticals were capable of reducing inflammation, restoring immune function, and restoring cellular function. And they had compared this to many other medications and nutraceuticals, and they felt that their formulation, which they were about to patent at that time, they have now submitted a patent, was something very, very effective. So when I saw this formulation, and I put my experience clinically with what I've been seeing in terms of the patients who in particular had such severe autonomic dysfunction, we decided to collaborate, and with the help of a third person, Joseph McGraby, who is a world expert in nutraceuticals based in Israel, we created a formulation which has the potential, or we thought had the potential, to reduce a lot of the symptoms that were being driven through inflammation, the cytokine stimulation occurring in the immune system, a abnormal uptake of serotonin. And so because of the background of the University of Tel Aviv and myself, and obviously the science that was being published on a daily basis in the literature, we created a formulation which you can see on the website of Restore. But effectively, it was a 100% natural formulation, which consisted of, as I said, BCP, DHEA, pregnenolone, St. John's wort, boswellia, quercetin, and zinc. And the goal of this formulation was to reduce inflammation, improve immune system function, improve memory, mental acuity, and sleep disorders, and hopefully help people who were suffering all these symptoms as a result of their COVID infection. So we spent a good year at least trying to source all the ingredients to put together into this formulation that we named Restore. And then we had to do a study. So it was all very well being theoretical and being involved in laboratory animals, but we really wanted to do a study before we took this any further. And so for the following year, we basically did a study where we invited patients with long haul COVID. They had to have proof that they had previously had COVID and who were still having symptoms at a minimum of 3 months after their initial infection. And we got patients from all over the United States. We used social media to recruit them. The patients had to prove their previous infectious status with COVID. And then we documented all their complaints, and we started to treat patients with the understanding that the patients had to work with us. We really didn't want to just give out the medicine or the formulation without feeling that we were making progress. So we gave 2 weeks supply of the medication or formulation at a time. And I keep using the word medication because that's old habits die hard. It's 2 weeks of the nutraceutical or dietary supplement. And once they had tried it for 2 weeks, they were asked to compare their response to their initial baseline symptoms. And if they wanted to continue, we would provide them with another 2 weeks. So we did this study over a period of 6 months. We recruited patients from, as I said, I think it was 18 states in the United States of America. And then we needed to close the study because we needed to analyze the data. Well, the first thing that happened was when we closed the study, people who had been taking this were really very frustrated because they wanted more, and we didn't have more. We really had enough for the study. But what we found out from the study was that other than a very few number of patients who were inadvertently taking antidepressants, which are contraindicated with this formulation, we saw significant improvement in the symptoms of almost everybody who tried it to some extent or another. One has to remember that long-haul COVID is a multi-symptom disorder, and it's not necessarily realistic to expect 100% improvement, even though in many patients we did. And on another part of this particular website, you can see testimonials to that effect. So as we finished the study and we analyzed the data, we saw that in a very large number of patients, their symptoms were improving dramatically. We were getting requests from a number of patients to not only get the Restore product for themselves, but to be able to provide it to their spouses, partners, relatives, etc. And obviously we didn't have anything available, but what was so dramatic was to be able to hear people who had been on the standard traditional investigational medications that were being used before by them, how much they were feeling better. So based on the results of the study, which hopefully will be published in the very near future, and based on now being very confident that I was able to suggest this formulation to long-haul patients, knowing that there was a good chance that they could get some benefit from it. And that was the whole point of the study, is previously it had been a theory. It was something that we had formulated, but we didn't know if it worked. Now, after seeing the number of patients who we had treated feeling so much better, wanting to continue with it, there was no doubt in my mind that it was safe and that it was something that was certainly worth using, if not alone, as an additional supplement to the management of long-haul COVID. And so that's where we are today. We have finally gotten to the point where we have been able to manufacture the exact formulation so that for patients with long-haul COVID, I'm going to be able to provide the formulation known as Restore to anybody who wants it, who's an adult, who's not breastfeeding, who's not pregnant. We put those things in there as a precaution. I don't really know if it would affect them, but certainly that is a label on the bottle, and we would like to adhere to it. And I am hoping that this is going to allow, not only in the United States, but around the world, a significant improvement and benefit to the quality of life of one of the most debilitating illnesses that I think we've seen in our lifetime, and where people have been unable to function, unable to work, unable to have any quality of life, and are kind of desperate. And so the belief is that Restore is going to help people improve their quality of life and get back to normal. The question I'm asked as to whether I know how long someone needs to take it is, I don't. I've seen some patients who, when they stop it, have been completely in remission. I've seen others who feel that their symptoms start to reoccur. So I think it's really a matter of the individual trying it for themselves to see how long they may need it for. But I'm very, very comfortable that it's a safe product. And so if that's what it takes until the immune system reboots itself, I feel this is remarkably simple and easy to take. And from my perspective, at the tail end of doing many studies in my career, this is one of the most gratifying and exciting studies that I've actually ever been involved in. And I really need to thank Professor Geber, Yossi, and the University of Tel Aviv for giving me this opportunity of working with them. And I certainly hope that this is going to be something that will live up to, obviously, what I am describing it as something that is going to, hopefully in a natural way, recharge, restore the immune system to the individual's levels that they were prior to the COVID infection. If there are any questions or concerns, you can find on the website of www.enviromune.com a place to ask questions if you have any comments. If it does help you, For me, the best thing in the world is getting somebody to give us a testimonial as to how much it's helped them. So please, we really would love to hear from you. And I hope that for whoever is listening to this and about to take Restore, that it will live up to what I believe it has done for many people who've taken it to this time. Thank you.